Getting to and from work is integral for every worker, but for farm workers, this challenge is even more complicated. In the past decade, there have been several reports about accidents involving farm workers, and even when there isn't one, the commute is defined by extremely long distances under the most difficult circumstances. How does this affect their working and living conditions? Are there ways to do it better? And what role does the employer play in responding to this? Well, we'll find out in today's show. Workers' World starts now.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes, them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system and regrets, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them you think is...
Welcome to the weekly Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Shariq Trubadi. Thanks once again for having joined us. Michaela Miller will be with us a bit later for your weekly news. Now, farm workers in South Africa work hard and long hours for extremely low wages, and they have to live in the most appalling conditions, often at the receiving end of the abuse of their employers. Hundreds of thousands of farm workers and their families have been evicted from farms to make way for business ventures by farm owners. Very little has improved for farm workers in democratic South Africa, and in many cases, living and their working conditions have actually gotten worse. One such area is transport to and from work, since most farm workers do not live on farms anymore. That's our conversation for today, but first let's go to the insert prepared for us by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
A truck takes about 200 people. And we've been complaining as labor about these things.
Ik werk al alle jaren daar op Babylon Storen en ik maak alle jaren gebruik van hierdie transport. Als ons gebruik maak van die wene, dan maak ons gebruik van een bakkie. Dat is een 4x4 en dan maak ons strips, maar nog steeds is die bakkie gelei. So ik ben, ja, ik wil maar bij zijn werk komen en wel iets op zijn tafel zet zo.
There is a transport, but that transport is very dangerous because some of the time there's overload on the trucks. Maybe you found out that we are hundreds in one truck. So every time there's overload, then you because of months ba njengoba siqinene nje umzekelo kuxesha ngoku yi-COVID andithi kufuneka la social distance, but ngoku ayibikho, there's no social distance because the trucks are all the time they are overloaded, but we don't have a choice because we need money, so it's very difficult.
Our workers is dying the most horrific deaths on the farms, farm accidents. On the 29th of April 2015, a young man by the name of David Conrad, he died in what is called a cycas, sort of almost like a tractor. It plants and it takes out wheat at the same time. And that thing have cut him to pieces. Only his face was still intact.
When South Africa went into its new dispensation, there was a time where there was no legislation for farm workers, so farmers could pay them up to anything. There was no legislative guides and so forth. And we've also seen during that period that, people were really struggling and there was a lot of violations because nobody kept an eye on these things. But coming into the 1990s, South Africa signed on to World Trade Organization. There were certain agreements. We had to lower our tariffs. We had to open our markets. And here we were competing with highly subsidized economies in the north. So before, in the 80s still, South African farmers were subsidized. So they didn't have to struggle that much because their produce and all of that was supported. But that doesn't necessarily mean it translates into improving the livelihoods of farm workers. But come 1990, suddenly they didn't have that protection anymore.
The issuing of license is a provincial competency. We cannot pinpoint any farmer that has gone to jail or was even given a fine for the deaths of all our people that died in those tracks of death.
Farmers at some points, they don't care about their employees. And also when you look at the law, it's not much that is talked about or it is regulated in terms of transport. Hence, the farmers will do as they wish. As I said before, that they will tell you, Kuti, there is no law that is forcing me to transport.
And there's no visibility of the traffic in these places because the trucks are highly overloaded. And you don't see that there's intervention from the traffic department side that they find you in the vineyards. They are not caring about your safety on the roads.
The trucks is part of what we refer to as the health and safety issues on the truck. And the health and safety issues, it's almost non-existent on farms. And that is one area that is being hugely neglected. But that is neglected precisely because of the lack of inspectors.
We have 218 inspectors, and our mandate is stemming from Chapter 10 of the Basic Conditions of Employment that spells out the powers and the functions of an inspector. In terms of Section 64(1) stipulates that an inspector may promote, he may monitor and enforce compliance, conduct inspections at the employer premises, investigate complaints that comes to inspection and enforcement units, and then endeavor to secure compliance by securing and undertaking, issuing compliance order, contravention notice, prohibition notice, and further refer to court if the employer is still found non-compliant after inspection.
As Labour, what we've experienced over these years, I think things have not changed yet, where you find the question of farmers ignoring our labour laws. You go to farmers where those farmers don't respect any labour laws. And the sad reality is that we find that these farmers are treated with kid gloves when workers raise concerns. So what we're saying is that we should have stronger emphasis in ensuring that there's enforcement at all these farms.
Every time when there's an accident, the minister speak out and say one farm worker too many. It's not going to happen again. And once the story is quiet, nothing happened. And we don't want like promises anymore, man. We want commitments to regulate farm worker transport. We keep the momentum when it happened, and then everything fade out again. But it must become part of our campaign struggles. And decent work would include having safe transport to work.
All right, so we are talking about a very interesting conversation today, particularly farm workers. And we've seen there in the insert that it's not the best way to get to and from work. But these are very old traditions, and you have an apartheid spatial planning scenario there that's really distancing the worker from their workplace. And even when they travel to and from there are odious costs. And there's also the type of transport that is not the safest. And that's a conversation we are having today. And we have with us Andrikus van der Westhuizen, the chairperson of the Agriculture, Environmental Affairs and Development. Ms. Viji Chetty is with us, the acting director for traffic law enforcement, as well as Nosy Peterson, the executive president of the Black Association of the Agricultural Sector, BAUSI. A very good day. Thank you very much to you, gentlemen and lady, for having joined us. It is indeed a pleasure. I'd like to start off with you, Nosy, just to give me an overview of the working conditions of farm workers. Of course, on the one hand here we deal with their working condition, but also that entails getting to and from work in particular. But these are historical challenges. Give me the context for where farm workers find themselves right now.
I think it's important to place it in its historical context, as you pointed out. If you look at the time when I arrived in the agriculture sector, which was 1997, farm workers were earning 60, what was it? Not even 50 odd rand a day. And by the time that we had the farm worker strike in 2012, they were earning 69 rand
per day. Now, I want you to imagine 69 rand per day, and that is maybe the only person in the house that is earning. And that family have to live on that 69 rand a day.
Yeah.
There is also the issue of the conditions of employment, huge violations. We have done several surveys on farms. We had the Human Rights Commission a report that Bossy have delivered their findings 2 days before them, but it was basically the same, and we did it independently, the one not knowing about the other.
Yeah, and I have vivid memories about that very scene where you burst onto the scene with the Dorans, and I want to talk about how that perhaps is a catalyst for some of the challenges that we saw even later when there was an effort to get a better wage. Andrikus, thanks very much for your time. How do you understand some of these challenges? Because as we now established, they are deeply historical, and now we need to claw our way back from there.
Yes, good day. Indeed, it's historical. But I think we also need to admit that a lot of these workers that are being transported are seasonal workers. And that is particularly where I believe our challenges are when it comes to the safe and dignified transport of workers. Seasonal workers, by its very definition, are not full-time workers on the farms. And our farms are also by definition not in the urban centers of our province. So there are always these distances, and often quite large distances, that workers need to be assisted with to travel to their places of work. Now, we also know that, unfortunately, in South Africa, we cannot afford, it seems, to have a decent public transport system, and therefore many of these workers are absolutely reliant on their employers to transport them to the various farms. And quite often, you know, these places of work are relatively small and they are widely spread out. So geographically, it's also a challenge to get to work and back.
Yeah, but I think there are other challenges about why workers happen to always just be seasonal, and we saw that how farmers have diversified their yield throughout the year, and the issue around accommodation, which we'll come to a bit later. But Ms. Viji Chetty, I want to just quickly, I'll come back to you just now, Nozier. What does the law say in regards to the transport of workers? Because we are all akin to scenes of people huddled up on a bakkie, on a truck, in not the most safest conditions. Is there any indication about whether that is lawful?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I think it's very important in terms of, you know, understanding the history as it was mentioned to us. And we're often finding at the moment, you know, the transportation of farm workers, because it's happening on various types of vehicles, right? There's a single regulation, Regulation 247 of the National Road Traffic Act that specifies when a passenger can be carried in a goods vehicle, right? And, you know, it comes back to the humane aspect, but it also comes back to the need. And rightfully so, as said by my colleague Enriquez, that there's never been provision made for safe transportation of them, right? So normally passengers get carried in passenger carrying vehicles, right? It's firstly not humane to transport them on goods vehicles. Goods vehicles were never designed to carry passengers. So we're finding ourselves from a law enforcement perspective very challenged in the sense that you've got to remember the humane side, because these farm workers are like every other citizens of our country trying to do an honest day's job.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also want to look at their safety. So Regulation 247 does not specify the type of vehicles that they can be traveled in, but to allow them to be transported in goods vehicles with provisions to very minimal specifications about the safety.
Yeah, and I want to get to that. I want to get to that, whether there are ways to get around the very real challenges we have right now in terms of how do we get worker to and from the workplace. That's our conversation here this evening. So once we return from the break, we'll get into that and more.
Welcome back. Before we continue, let's get into this week's highlights, which has a big focus on industrial disputes and strikes in the USA as workers there fight for real wage increases and against extreme inequality in the context of high inflations. The highlights are as follows. South Africa's public sector unions are in salary dispute with government. Workers at Big South Florida hotel boost minimum pay to $20 and retain union jobs. A historic moment leads to more than 2,000 nursing home workers winning their demands. And US rail strike averted by tentative deal as workers decry grueling conditions. For more, stay tuned for the full bulletin. Over to Tashrik now to get into this week's topic of discussion.
Okay, so farm workers, their living conditions is our conversation right now, but more so we're trickling it down to getting to and from work and the very real challenges. In fact, the very real probability of them getting into an accident, the manner in which they are transported is our conversation right now. Nosy, you wanted to jump in a bit earlier. I'm going to give you the opportunity now, but I just want to put to you that sometimes, and I'm not sure whether it's hyperbole, whether it's an exaggeration, but sometimes there is this effort to try and link it to slavery. You know, people that were huddled up in a little boat or huddled up in a truck together. And these are the images that when you speak about these conditions that people make examples of. Would you be willing to say that that is still the case today?
Yeah, I'll respond now to that. I just need to correct something that Andrikus was saying. I want to point out here, Andrikus, it is not primarily a seasonal worker phenomenon that farm workers need to be transported. Farmers are now guilty of creating distance between the place of work and home of the farm workers because they are buying land now in our townships. Macassar is a case in point. The Dorans itself is a case in point. They're buying land in our townships. And they build houses there. Right? They build houses, and those workers there is not protected under the ESTA law now. They are now under the PI Act, which is a bit more ruthless than the ESTA is. So it is not primarily a seasonal phenomenon, seasonal worker phenomenon. It is now being hated by the farmer themselves, that distance. But there's this concerted effort to get farm workers off the farms as quickly as possible. You go there to the Somerset area, the Somerset West area, you go into those farms there. You will hardly see black faces residing on those farms again. Those farms will soon be the people that will be staying on that farms will soon be primarily white people and no more people of color. That is what is taking place now. That is our current reality. And yes, of course, the treatment is tantamount to that of slavery, the way those workers are being huddled there in a bundle, irrespective of whether it is COVID. Right? They cannot even keep their mask on because it's getting claustrophobic in there. I mean, there was one accident there where there was 70 workers on the farm, on a truck. Will a farmer have 70 sheep on a truck? Will he have 70 of his cattle on a truck? He cares more for the cattle than for the black lives. Black lives also matters.
Yeah, let me put to Andrikus very quickly on this particular issue that you raised, the Dorans, the Somerset, the Macassar examples. Andrikus, do you have any sort of knowledge about this? That at the moment there's a program designed to keep black people off the farm. No more is there an opportunity for people to live on a farm, and where they do live on farms, they're being chucked out because of, dare I call them a liability?
Yeah, I won't say it's a devised structure, but I think many farmers are looking at alternate ways to augment their income, and they have found that turning farm workers' houses into tourist accommodation is a far more lucrative, way of using your assets. And then, there are different views on whether it's good to stay on a farm or whether it's better to go and stay in town, where you are close to the amenities, where you are close to church, where you are close to your children's school, where you are not cut off, from the wider community, etc. I know that in many cases people prefer to stay on the farms because, the quality of life that they believe they are enjoying there. Many people love raising their kids rather on farms, far away from, places like Shebeens and so on. So Noji is quite correct, but I don't think it is driven by necessarily a racist attitude. I think it's an economic reality that, particularly in cases like Somerset West, Franschhoek and Stellenbosch, which I know pretty well, that people feel they can earn more money from those houses or residences on their farms.
Okay, Andrikus, I'm just going to push you on that. I'm going to push you just quickly on a comment that you made regarding where these people are placed away from Shebeens. I think it speaks to an attitude that farm workers are only either seasonal workers that have these challenges or are drunk all the time. I perhaps know you didn't quite mean it like that, but that is a system that was created by the farming community for years. It's infamous for having created the DOP system. So now you're saying that, it's far away from Shebeens and that sort of thing. It almost gives me the impression that you're thinking that farm workers are just drunkards.
No, you are now putting words in my mouth, and I'm sorry about that. What we've seen, for example, take a case like Boschendal, where the people living on the various properties that are grouped together as Boschendal have been given ownership of their houses in a place called Lankiedok. And I do know that many of them would love to go back to their previous places where they stayed. Because unfortunately, all our children, when you stay in town, they get exposed to a wider variety of opportunities, but also a wider variety of challenges. That is just a reality, and obviously it depends on each individual what he or she will make of those. I, as a former educator, I'm quite excited about the fact that parents can now, reach the school. They can go to parent evenings, and if they have questions regarding their children's education, they can go because the school is now quite close by. Whereas in the past, staying on a farm often entails huge costs to go and do your shopping in town, etc. So there are two sides to this.
Okay,
and,
I hear you. I hear you. Ms. Chetty, in terms of the transport, what are the common findings in the event there happens to be an accident? Nosy earlier spoke about a shocking amount of people, I think he said 70 odd or so, huddled up in an accident and so many injuries. What are the common factors if in the event there is an accident where farm workers are transported?
Right. No, thank you for that question. It's a reality, the 70 and the 80. We've seen it ourselves. The fact that you're loading more people, and if that vehicle is involved in a crash, the likelihood of more people being injured or killed is greater, right? In the sense of the amount of people. But I don't think we need to just rule out, it's an assumption that it's due to the overload, that vehicle was involved in an accident. But you've got to also look at aspects of vehicle and driver fitness, right? You need to look at the driver. Does he possess the correct code of driving license? Does he have the skill to drive that vehicle? Does he even have the professional driving permit to transport passengers? Then you need to look at fatigue levels. Is that driver of a fit mind and wellness, from a wellness perspective, to be able to drive that vehicle, thinking about the distances for the transportation, but also the working times of the farm.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the roadworthiness of the vehicle, that also plays a factor.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that when I come back. The roadworthiness of the vehicle, because that vehicle would be the property of the farm worker. So that will pick up after the break. Do stay with us.
Welcome back. You're watching Workers World Labour News. I'm Michaela Miller. Thanks for joining us. The unions, which include the SA Policing Union and the National Union of Public Service and Allied Workers, have obtained a certificate of non-resolution after the conciliation meeting between the employer and unions could not resolve the matter. SAPO National spokesperson Lisiba Tobekhale has more.
The negotiations started around the month of May. Amongst the demands, it was that there should be a salary increase of 10%. That was, our demand that we placed on the table. And as we speak, currently, government is offering 3% on the baseline, and as SAPU and SAFTU affiliated trade unions in the PSCBC, we are demanding 8% on the baseline. And we are calling on the employer to revise their offer, to come to the table and further negotiate with us. As much as we have declared a dispute, and now we are in possession of a certificate of non-resolution from the conciliation. The issue of social dialogue, it is important. We are open to further negotiations. We are open as SAPU to further social dialogue with the employer in order to come and to come closer to one another. So we are calling on them to revise their offer, to come to the PSCBC and indeed table something better that we could be able to take back to our members. So for now, the 3% was rejected by our members. And we are busy balloting our members. We are currently busy with developing picketing rules in terms of the Labour Relations Act in preparation of the strike.
And while workers in South Africa are battling to secure decent wage increases that at least keep pace with inflation, the US counterparts have become more organized and militant, winning significant improvements to the conditions of employment. Weeks after a big strike vote, 450 hotel workers at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida, had an incredible victory and reached a tentative agreement on a 4-year contract that boosts minimum hourly pay to $20 per hour, ends subcontracting, and restores daily housekeeping. Hotel Diplomat workers voted 99% in favor of a strike on September 2nd. The contract expired on August 31st after a 2-month extension. The strike threat paid off and workers won the $20 hourly minimum for staff by 2025. Current minimum pay, which starts at $13.95 per hour, would immediately go up to $17 under the tentative agreement. And while tipped workers didn't get the $10 an hour wage they were pushing for, the hotel agreed to automatically add 20% gratuity to customers' bills as a service surcharge. After months of negotiations and the longest nursing home strike, members of the SEIU Healthcare Pennsylvania have used their collective strength to win union contracts that invest in staffing, resident care, and securing a $600 million in funding. Wage increases, a fundamental part of the strike and negotiations, have been approved with across-the-board increases of all workers. In addition, longevity increases intended to reward workers for long service and retain was included in the settlement. On average, salary increase for all workers across the 3 contracts hover around 24%. The new union contracts will impact and improve the working conditions of more than 2,000 nursing home workers. And lastly, in Washington, USA, President Joe Biden's administration ensured a tentative deal to avert a railway strike that could have wreaked havoc over the US economy, but union members angered by tough working conditions have yet to ratify the agreement. A deal between major US railroads and unions representing tens of thousands of workers was reached after about 20 hours of negotiations. Workers agreed not to strike while votes are tallied over the next few weeks to ratify the agreement. The deal includes a 24% wage increase over a 5-year period from 2020 through to 2024, as well as a $1,000 lump sum payments in each of the next 5 years. Well, that's all from my side. You can share your stories and thoughts with us by sending an email to labour@wwmp.org.za. Tashrik standing by to continue this week's topic of discussion.
Okay, so we're on to something. Evidently, there are very real challenges. And how do we get workers safely to and from work? And how do we improve their living, working conditions? There are contradictions largely informed by our past, but getting onto fixing them is our conversation today. Ms. Chetty, I want to come back to you immediately. You spoke just before the break regarding the vehicles itself. That's not always roadworthy. Are these vehicles generally modern? Are they roadworthy? Do they have very real challenges? Do they go for their way-ins? What are your impressions of the type of vehicles that do transport workers?
Yeah, no, it's prevalent of the heavy motor vehicles that's been used. It differs from farm to farm. Currently we're doing operations in the Overberg, your Cape Winelands area, as well as your West Coast area. It's different per farm. While some have, the older type of vehicles, others have newer types. They've made modifications to it to cater for the sides that needs to be reinforced to transport them. So we're picking up a few unroadworthy vehicles. But from a safety point of view, then some of them lack the safety features that they need to have, while others are not actually transporting their passengers safely, whereas maybe they've got equipment together with the people. So it's a variety of things that we're finding, and they are still compelled to do like any other goods vehicle, they need to still go for their roadworthiness checks. And those are some of the things that we're trying to focus on, and trying to do and create the awareness about, can't we cluster them into smaller groups with more vehicles that you might have?
Yeah.
So it's little initiatives that we're trying, because it also shouldn't just come across like, that we want to actually charge, we want to summons drivers. We want to try and open up that engagements with farm owners to try and make them aware of their responsibilities as well, when the initial transportation happens.
And talking about responsibility, Nosy, the conversation regarding getting workers now to also go to the meetings of their children's school, etc., that sort of thing. One of the things that we often don't talk about when we refer to farm workers is the fact that there are children that grow up on farms that need to travel very long distances to get to and from school. Getting from one area to the next, for instance, for medical care, for dental care and that sort of thing is also proving to be a challenge. And sometimes those people are transported in taxis and things like that, and often compounds the problem and puts them directly in the firing line. What are your experiences regarding what one could almost call the peripheral issues involving transport, the transport of workers, and be it their family members?
I wouldn't say these are peripheral issues. I would say that is indeed part of the social construct of the farm workers, part of their everyday life. Because they get sick on a regular basis, they need to go to shopping, they need to go to school every day. So transport is definitely required in that regard. But what we see is happening now, prior to the 2012 strike, in some instances people were given transport to go on shopping on a fortnight, or those who earn weekly on a weekly basis, those who earn monthly on a monthly basis. And they were given the transport. But post-2012, they now have been denied the transport unless they pay the diesel and the driver selling it for the day. In instances where they never paid. In instances where they did make a contribution, they need now to pay extra.
Yeah,
but I think I just need to point out something to Ms. Chetty in terms of Regulation 247. It's very scanty regulation. You have admit that yourself. But what for me is fascinating, this thing says there should be no overload. Now, when is overload? It doesn't give a figure how many? And Dr. Meyer, the MEC for Agriculture, he himself said in an interview of Daily Maverick, he said there is currently no law that determines the number of people to be looked at, to be loaded at the back of a bakkie or a truck. But what has he done? That he said that on the 2nd of February 2021. What have he done until now to ensure that Regulation 247 is very explicit and indicate to everybody that so many people on a bakkie.
Let me go to Ms. Chetty quickly, because I want to go and bring Andrikas into this conversation before we go to a break as well. Ms. Chetty, how do you interpret then Regulation 247? At which stage does it qualify as being an overloaded vehicle?
Yeah, and if I can just refer to what I started with when I said, a passenger is supposed to be in a passenger carrying vehicle. There, the regulation is clear in terms of working, seating and standing capacity. When it comes to a goods vehicle, that's when you get your gross vehicle mass that plays a factor, right? There's been, and rightfully so, my colleague Nosy, the Regulation 247 needs a serious revamp if we want to seriously look at how to adequately and safely load passengers. It doesn't make provision for that. It makes provision for minimal safety features that needs to be designed on the goods vehicle. And therefore, you get the regular complaints that would come in to say, stop that vehicle, it's heavily overloaded. But, if we're going to take it through to a weighbridge where vehicles are weighed, goods vehicles are weighed for the intended purpose of carrying goods, 10 to 1, that vehicle's not going to be overloaded because it's carrying people.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need to seriously, 247, that was one of the resolutions that needs to be worked on, but it's based on national, it's a national intervention. It does not only clearly apply to the Western Cape.
Yeah.
247 is the National Road Traffic Act. So it's something that needs to be driven by national. And I think our ministers, have been briefed on resolutions.
Sure.
And we just need to find out, how can we expedite that.
Okay, Andrikas, let's talk about expediting it or mitigating it if there is even such a scenario. So we have a topography that suggests that, one farm to the next farm is very, very far to move around. If we don't huddle people up in a goods vehicle, what is the alternative and who bears that particular cost of that vehicle or the several vehicles, inclusive of the price of fuel and that sort of thing? And when a farm worker is earning $70 to $120, it becomes a costly exercise. So is there any room, leeway, latitude for any sort of practicality to this debate?
Yes, indeed. There is a lot. And as Ms. Chetty has said, we must realize that traffic regulations in South Africa is a national competency. There's also a calculation that can be done, and I think the average mass of a person, an adult person, is taken as 60 kilograms. So you can use that to calculate whether a vehicle is indeed overloaded or not when it's carrying people and not goods. The other important thing for us in the Western Cape is that the majority of these accidents can be ascribed not to unroadworthiness, but to driver error. And I think Ms. Chetty would be able to confirm that. Quite often these drivers, they need to go out in the dark, early morning. There may be fog on the road. They may have to cross important highways such as the N1, etc., at the Durance and so on. And what we are doing from the provincial parliament side is to try and encourage people to adapt their behavior first when they're driving, to install in their driving.
Andrikas, do me a favor, let's park that right there, right, and come back to it after the break to find out exactly what is being done about it. I'm going to have to go for a break very quickly, and Michaela Miller will be joining us after the break for this week's Labour News. Okay, what do we do about it? We have a real challenge. There's a bit of history, but there's also the perpetuation of this very modern day scenario of topography, of apartheid spatial planning. Distance is a big issue. Living conditions, working conditions, and traveling conditions all falling under the same umbrella. Andrikus, I mean, the question being put to law enforcement there earlier, let me put it to you regarding, for instance, the experience that Nosy highlighted during COVID. There were restaurants and other businesses that were either targeted or shut down because they are not keeping to the regulations. Surely there could have been some consideration. This is the experience of workers where farm owners could have been held to some degree of account.
Yes, indeed. And my feedback is that some of them have been. We also know now.
In what way, may I ask? Yes. How were they kept to account?
Yes, you know, many farms have got packing sheds and so on. And they were subject to the same regulations that your other factories, etc., have been subjected to. I think we also now know with COVID that the dangerous position from a COVID-19 perspective is to be in a confined space and not actually to be on an open tractor or even on a trailer, etc. But I'm really grateful that Mr. Peters has actually started addressing the wider issue of farm worker safety, because it's not only accidents. And I think that is, for me, the important thing that he has raised.
Andrikus, sorry man, I hear you, Andrikus, you know, but you're not telling me how they were held to account. You're telling me that the law applied to them. Of course, that's what I'm putting to you. The law applies to them. What was done in the instances that Nosy mentioned? Because you may not have the actual details with you, but can you give me one example of how a farm worker, or a farm owner rather, had been held to account for breaching what were evident laws or regulations that govern COVID?
Well, not only COVID, but also I've personally been with some of the labor inspectors to some of our Western Cape farms, and they have pointed out to the farmers, and they've even issued a summons to some of those farmers for breaches in terms of occupational health and safety regulations. Farmers are, you know, subjected to the same occupational health and safety regulations than any other employer, and they're no exception. So, and that is what I've said. Mr. Petersen actually hit the nail on the head when he said, let's not only look at accidents, but also look at the many other risks that farm workers are exposed to. And there I must ask our labor inspectors to be more active and to visit more and more farms. And not only when the previous Minister of Labour, Minister Willifant, visited the Western Cape, but they must really have a continuous and you know, drive to ensure that, you know, all our workers, where they are together, whether it's COVID, whether it's exposure to heights, poison, dangerous, you know, vehicles and so on, that they act in all those cases. That is my appeal to our labor inspectors, because unfortunately, it's in the nature, it seems to me, of everybody. If you can get by, if you can take a shortcut, people will take shortcuts. And that is where government comes in, that is where our regulations come in, and that is where our inspectors really need to play a big role.
Yeah.
I can just confirm that from the traffic department, provincial traffic department, they've really given us feedback that during the past harvesting season, they were really concentrating on the transport of farm workers.
Okay, but on the whole, Nosy, let me put it to you, that these are very challenging, you know, I suppose, you know, dealing with the spatial issue, the topography, all of that. How does one practically get around that? You know, farm owners themselves have gone through a difficult period with their yield, with the weather that's been an issue, fertilizers and getting them in here, that sort of thing, and the cost exposures. Those are very real challenges of farm owners. We are expecting them to a certain degree to play their part to close the gap of some of the challenges that the farm workers experience. How practical is it that you expect this of them? Do you have that expectation of them?
Indeed, I do have that expectation of them, because in terms of the Health and Safety Act, it is the employer's responsibility to provide a safe workplace to all its workers. I think it is important that we understand, and especially the law enforcement. You see, issuing of license, I have been advised, is a provincial competency, the issuing of the license itself. Now, you must remember, you might be issuing a license to kill. You are responsible for that licenses that you issue. Are you managing those who you are licensing? And I am saying you are not, because my people get killed on a regular basis because they are not being managed. You have a responsibility, because that competency that you receive comes with a responsibility. And that responsibility is to manage those that you issue the license to. Your traffic cops should be there in the street. When the trucks come, you know what I'm saying today. You should tell them, when the truck comes, look at the back of the truck, pull off that truck, pull off that truck. We cannot treat people like that.
Okay.
That is the responsibility of you as a law enforcer. But the farmer itself also have a responsibility. The farmer have to provide a safe and a dignified vehicle for the people to be transported.
Yeah.
We
I know, I just want to put that to Ms. Chetty. Of course, you are a bureaucrat, right? You need to hopefully get the lawmakers to change the law, bring definition to it so as to ensure we don't continue to perpetuate some of the cultures that exist right now. But what practically can be done? I mean, in the interim, while we can't prove to a full extent overloading because of the deficiencies of the law, surely your officers cannot continue to allow what is evidently a risk here with transporting people 60 plus in one goods vehicle.
You need to remember you can enforce only based on legislation. And basically, our guys, and that's why we've changed the focus, right? Safety is not just on overloading. We're now stopping to check them on the driver and vehicle fitness. If I say driver fitness, it applies to the code of license. And I just want to correct Nosy, it's not a provincial responsibility to issue licenses. That is with the local authority level, right? And if we're looking at the heart of the farm where it actually happens, then we need to get our local authority traffic on board. We are basically on the major routes. We can lock down the entrances and exits to farms if it's on national roads. So we really need our counterparts at local authorities to also, step up and start looking at the challenges at the source of the problem, where people are being loaded onto vehicles and when they're getting off again. So, that lies with the district municipalities, that we need their efforts in terms of joining this fight. And we're really missing an integral role player here tonight, which is the Department of Agriculture, because they've also done a lot in terms of the district rural safety plan, where they actually going into the farming areas, speaking to the owners about the safety. We've embarked on our road safety management team responsible for awareness and education, who've joined our colleagues at agriculture, because every bit of sensitivity and awareness is going to bring that safety aspect that we're looking at. Yeah. But, from a provincial traffic point of view, we are hosting these operations. We're doing it diligently. We're managing the licensing part, because if we find the drivers to be tired, we're going to tell them, you need to park off and rest.
Okay.
But there poses other challenges.
Yeah.
When you have overloaded people on the side of a major freeway, the vehicle to come and collect them again, then you've got a pedestrian problem.
Sure.
So it isn't just
I'm out of time. I'm out of time, Ms. Chetty. I
challenges.
just quickly want to, maybe a quick yes or no from you. Do you have enough vehicles and staff to cover pretty much all of the major routes?
Yes, definitely. Like I said, we've looked at the most critical areas right now, which is the Cape Winelands, from your Stellenbosch right up to your Durance area, including the Robertson Road. We've got the West Coast covered up to Vredendal, and then we're looking at the Overberg area, which covers basically the Caledon Swellen Dam area.
Okay.
And we've got that on our tactical plan.
I hear you.
Can I
Thanks so very
add?
much for that. Andrikos, we're out of time. Very quickly,
Yes.
from your side, how do we
Can I-
begin to
can I
fix
just-
this problem? It's,
Yes.
it's a mammoth one.
Can I just say Provincial is also making use of technology with cameras, speed cameras, etc. Can I say what I would like to see? And I know it might be a bit pie in the sky, but I would like the passengers on those goods vehicles to be able to freely report irresponsible driving, to be able to go to an anonymous number and to say, but listen, I don't feel safe in the back of this vehicle when that person is driving, because I don't think that those people that are involved in these accidents, that this is a once-off event.
Okay.
I think many drivers have got a history of reckless driving, and they need to be able to be reported.
I think we just need to find the proper mechanism, because we're talking cell phones data, and yeah, not everybody has that access. Nosy, very quickly, how pie in the sky do you think these ideals are? Can we fix it?
They are fixable, as I've indicated, if we all take responsibility.
Okay.
Because we are all responsible. It's not just some.
And I want to end on that. I want to end on that. Not the responsibility that we all share to try and fix this problem, because evidently I think that is, if we realize that, then we can get somewhere. Thank you very much to my guest for today's program, looking at the safety of farm workers and particularly how they are transported. That's it for today. Thank you very much for having tuned in. This was the Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Ashik Chubari.